In the quiet village of St. Mary's Mead, a priceless Roman coin vanishes from a locked museum case, sparking whispers of betrayal. Enter Miss Jane Marple, a sharp-eyed spinster whose gentle demeanour hides a relentless mind. As suspects, a nervous curator, a gruff guard, a scholarly historian, and a charming visitor point fingers. Miss Marple unravels their secrets, from hidden debts to shadowy deals. With a cunning trap and a village's gossip, she exposes the thief, proving that in a world of greed, no secret escapes her knitting needles. Can you spot the truth before she does? Chapter 1. The Empty Case. The morning sun poured through the high-arched windows of the St. Mary's Museum, painting the polished oak floors with patches of gold. The museum, a modest yet proud institution in the sleepy village of St. Mary's Mead, housed relics of bygone eras, from chipped pottery to tarnished swords. Miss Jane Marple, a slight figure in a tweed coat and a neatly pinned hat, stood before a glass display case in the Roman gallery. Her visit to the village was meant to be a quiet escape from her usual routine, a chance to enjoy the countryside and perhaps indulge in a little local history. But as her keen eyes, sharp behind her spectacles, fell upon the exhibit labelled Aureus of Emperor Nero, she froze. The velvet cushion within the case, meant to cradle a rare gold coin from 64 AD, was bare. A murmur rippled through the small crowd of early visitors, a schoolteacher, a pair of elderly tourists, and a young couple whispering excitedly. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the case, noting its unblemished lock and the faint dust on the glass, undisturbed by any clumsy attempt at tampering. Her lips pursed slightly, a habit when her mind began to thread together the first strands of a puzzle. She had an uncanny knack for spotting what others overlooked, and already something about the scene felt off, like a dropped stitch in a carefully knitted scarf. The museum's curator, Mr. Clarence Winthrop, burst into the gallery, his thin frame taut with distress. His spectacles slid down his nose as he stared at the empty case, his hands fluttering like startled birds. "It was here last night," he exclaimed, his voice cracking. "I checked it myself before locking up." His eyes darted to the gathered visitors, as if one might produce the coin from a pocket. The schoolteacher clucked sympathetically, while the tourists exchanged uneasy glances. Miss Marple stepped closer, her expression one of polite concern, though her mind was already cataloguing details. The curator's pallor, the faint tremor in his fingers, the way his tie was slightly askew, as if he'd dressed in haste. A young museum assistant, her face pale, scurried to fetch the local constable. Within the hour, Inspector Harrow arrived, his heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. A stout man with a bristling moustache, he carried an air of brisk efficiency, though Miss Marple suspected he leaned too readily on obvious conclusions. He surveyed the scene, jotting notes in a small black book. "Right then," he said, his voice gruff. "No signs of a break-in. The lock's intact. This was an inside job or a clever trick." He turned to Mr. Winthrop, who mopped his brow with a handkerchief. "You're certain it was here at closing?" "Absolutely," Mr. Winthrop replied, his voice high with indignation. "I inspect every exhibit myself. The Aureus was our pride. Priceless, really." He gestured toward a placard describing the coin's history. A gold piece minted during Nero's reign, its surface etched with the emperor's profile, a treasure unearthed near St. Mary's Mead a decade prior. Miss Marple read the placard quietly, her fingers brushing the handle of her handbag. Priceless, she thought, but not to everyone. To some, it was a fortune waiting to be claimed. As Inspector Harrow began questioning the staff, Miss Marple drifted to a nearby bench, her posture unassuming. She opened her handbag, drew out her knitting, a pale pink shawl in progress, and let her needles click rhythmically. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly spinster, absorbed in her craft. But her ears were attuned to every word, her eyes catching every glance. She noted the museum assistant's nervous fidgeting, the way Mr. Winthrop avoided meeting Harrow's gaze, and the curious stare of a well-dressed man lingering near the gallery's entrance. He was tall, with sleek dark hair and a tailored coat, his gold cufflinks glinting as he adjusted his scarf. A visitor, perhaps, but his interest in the commotion seemed more than idle. The crowd dispersed, shepherded out by a flustered staff member. But Miss Marple remained, her knitting a steady counterpoint to the museum's rising tension. She overheard a cleaner whisper to a colleague about the back door, often left ajar for deliveries, a detail Inspector Harrow had yet to explore. She also caught Mr. Winthrop muttering about disaster and reputation, his voice low but frantic. Miss Marple's needles paused for a moment. A missing coin, a locked case, a curator on edge, and a village with its share of secrets. She smiled faintly, her mind already weaving a pattern from these scattered threads. St. Mary's Mead, it seemed, was not as sleepy as it appeared. Chapter 2. The Suspects Emerge. The St. Mary's Museum, its Roman gallery now cordoned off with a velvet rope, buzzed with a nervous energy that seemed to seep into the very walls. By noon, the news of the stolen aureus had spread through the village of St. Mary's Mead, like a ripple across a still pond, drawing curious onlookers to the museum's iron gates. Miss Jane Marple, seated in the museum's tea room, a quaint corner with lace curtains and chipped porcelain cups, observed the unfolding scene with her characteristic quiet attentiveness. Her knitting needles clicked softly, working a pale pink shawl, but her sharp eyes missed nothing. The tea room, with its view of the museum's entrance and the Roman gallery beyond, was the perfect vantage point to study the players in what she sensed was a carefully staged drama. Inspector Harrow, his broad shoulders filling out his navy blue coat, had taken charge with the efficiency of a man accustomed to order. His moustache bristled as he addressed the small knot of museum staff gathered near the gallery's entrance. "No one leaves until I've spoken with them," he declared, his voice carrying a weight that silenced the murmurs. He held a black notebook, its pages already filled with scribbled observations, and his gaze swept the room, settling briefly on each person present. Miss Marple noted the way his eyes lingered on Mr. Clarence Winthrop, the curator, whose thin frame seemed to shrink under the scrutiny. She also noticed the night guard, Mr. Thomas Reed, standing stiffly to one side, his weathered face set in a scowl. Nearby, Dr. Evelyn Hartley, the historian, adjusted her glasses with a calm precision that contrasted with the curator's agitation. And then there was the visitor, Mr. Victor Langston, whose polished demeanour and easy smile seemed almost too perfect for the occasion. Miss Marple sipped her tea, the delicate aroma of Earl Grey grounding her thoughts. She had a habit of comparing people to those she'd known in her own village. Saint, Mary's mead was, after all, a microcosm of human nature. Mr. Winthrop reminded her of old Mr. Pennington, the village grocer, whose nervous tics betrayed a guilty conscience over shortchanging customers. Mr. Reed, with his gruff manner, was not unlike Sergeant Baxter, a man of duty, but prone to secrets. Dr. Hartley's cool intellect recalled Miss Cranston, the schoolmistress, whose passion for knowledge sometimes blinded her to practicalities. And Mr. Langston, well, he was a type she'd encountered often. The charming rogue, like young Tommy Pierce, who'd once swindled half the village with his smooth talk. These comparisons, Miss Marple knew, were not mere fancy. They were the threads that helped her unravel the truth. Inspector Harrow began his interviews in the curator's office, a cramped room cluttered with books and faded maps. Miss Marple, however, preferred the tea room, where the staff and visitors drifted in and out, their tongues loosened by the comfort of a warm drink. She beckoned to Miss Eliza Gray, the museum assistant, a mousy girl with a habit of twisting her apron strings. "Such a dreadful business, my dear," Miss Marple said, her voice soft and inviting. "You must have been terribly shocked." Eliza nodded, her eyes wide. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's awful. The coin was there when I dusted the cases yesterday afternoon. I swear it." Her voice trembled, and she glanced toward the gallery, where Inspector Harrow's silhouette was visible through the glass door. Miss Marple patted her hand gently. "Of course, dear. You're very thorough, I'm sure. Did you notice anything unusual yesterday? Anyone lingering, perhaps?" Eliza hesitated, then leaned closer. "Well, there was that gentleman, Mr. Langston, I think. He was ever so interested in the coin. Asked me all sorts of questions about it, like how old it was and who found it. He stayed by the case a long time, just staring." Her cheeks flushed, as if she'd said too much. Miss Marple smiled encouragingly, filing away the detail. A curious visitor was not necessarily a thief, but curiosity could mask intent. She thanked Eliza, who scurried off to fetch more tea, and turned her attention to the others. Mr. Winthrop entered the tea room next, his spectacles fogged from nervous perspiration. He sank into a chair opposite Miss Marple, accepting her offer of a cup with a shaky hand. "This is a disaster," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "The museum's reputation, my reputation ruined." His eyes darted to the window, where a small crowd still lingered outside. Miss Marple poured the tea with deliberate care, her movements slow and soothing. "It must be terribly trying, Mr. Winthrop," she said. "You've put so much into this museum. Tell me, how do you manage the keys to the display cases?" He blinked, startled by the question. "The keys? Oh, they're kept in my office, in a locked drawer. Only I have access. Well, and the senior staff, of course, but they're all trustworthy." His voice wavered, and he adjusted his tie, which was still askew from the morning's chaos. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of gentle concern, but her mind was alert. A locked drawer was only as secure as the people who knew its location. She recalled the village chemist, Mr. Hodges, who'd once boasted of his secure safe, only to have it pilfered by a cunning apprentice. Trust, she knew, was often misplaced. As Mr. Winthrop excused himself to speak with Harrow, Mr. Thomas Reed entered, his heavy steps announcing his arrival. The night guard was a burly man, his face lined with years of toil, and he carried a cane which he leaned on heavily. His limp, Miss Marple noted, was pronounced, but his arms were strong, suggesting a man still capable, despite his injury. She offered him a seat, and he accepted with a grunt, his eyes wary. "You were on duty last night, Mr. Reed?" she asked, her tone conversational, as if discussing the weather. "I," he said, his voice gruff, "patrolled every hour like always. No one got in or out. I'd have seen 'em." His jaw tightened, and he gripped his cane, the knuckles whitening. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, a soothing rhythm that seemed to ease his tension. "It must be difficult, patrolling with your injury," she said sympathetically. "How did it happen, if you don't mind my asking?" "War wound," he replied curtly. "Shrapnel, 17, slows me down, but I do my job." His tone was defensive, and Miss Marple sensed he was holding something back. She thought of old Mr. Carter, the village postman, whose gruffness hid a secret debt to a bookmaker. Men like Reed, she knew, often masked their vulnerabilities with bluster. She let the silence linger, a tactic that often prompted more words. But Reed stood abruptly, muttering about needing to check the back entrance. As he left, Miss Marple's eyes followed him, noting the way he glanced toward the museum's rear door. A small gesture, but one that suggested more than routine. Dr. Evelyn Hartley was next to pass through the tea room, her tall frame moving with a purposeful grace. She wore a tailored blazer and a scarf pinned with a silver brooch, her sharp features softened by a pair of wire-rimmed glasses. She declined Miss Marple's offer of tea, preferring to stand by the window, her arms crossed. "This is a blow to scholarship," she said, her voice crisp. "That coin was a link to Nero's reign, a testament to Roman craftsmanship. Its loss is incalculable." Her words were measured, but Miss Marple detected a flicker of passion beneath the cool exterior. She recalled Miss Cranston again, whose love for her books had once led her to hoard rare volumes, claiming they were safer in her care. "You've studied the coin closely, Doctor Hartley?" Miss Marple asked, her needles pausing for a moment. "Extensively," the historian replied. "I published a paper on its iconography last month. I was in my office until late yesterday, working on a new article." Her alibi was firm, but Miss Marple noted the way her fingers tightened on her brooch, a subtle sign of unease. Scholars, she knew, could be as possessive as collectors, and possession could breed temptation. She thanked Dr. Hartley, who nodded curtly and left, her heels clicking on the floor. The last to enter was Mr. Victor Langston, the visitor Eliza had mentioned. He was in his early 40s, with sleek dark hair and a smile that seemed to charm the very air around him. His tailored coat and gold cufflinks spoke of wealth, and his manner was effortlessly engaging. "Miss Marple, is it?" he said, taking a seat without invitation. "What a dreadful business! I do hope they recover that coin. It was quite the marvel." His voice was smooth, like polished mahogany. But Miss Marple's keen eyes caught the way his gaze flickered toward the gallery, as if assessing the scene. "You're a collector, Mr. Langston?" she asked, her tone light. "An enthusiast, rather," he said, leaning back. "Antiquities fascinate me. Greek vases, Roman coins, that sort of thing. I was here yesterday, admiring the aureus. Such a pity it's gone." His smile never wavered, but Miss Marple sensed calculation behind it. She thought of Tommy Pierce again, whose charm had disarmed many before his schemes were uncovered. Langston's vague account of his movements, strolling the village after the museum, Closed offered little substance, and his cufflinks, she noted, bore an intricate design, perhaps a clue to his tastes. As the tea-room emptied, Miss Marple remained, her knitting a steady rhythm against the hum of voices outside. She reflected on the morning's observations, Mr. Winthrop's nervous tics, suggesting more than mere shock, Mr. Reed's defensiveness, hinting at a hidden concern, Dr. Hartley's intellectual detachment, which might mask deeper motives, and Mr. Langston's polished charm, a veneer that could conceal greed. The museum's staff whispered among themselves, their glances darting toward the cordoned-off gallery. Miss Marple overheard a cleaner mention the back door again, left unlocked for a late delivery of cleaning supplies. It was a small detail, but in her experience, small details were the threads that unravelled the tightest knots. She finished her tea, her mind weaving a pattern from these disparate clues. The aureus, she knew, was more than a relic. It was a temptation, its value drawing out the worst in human nature. St. Mary's Mead, with its quaint cottages and quiet lanes, was no stranger to such temptations, and Miss Marple had seen them play out before. Greed disguised as duty, ambition cloaked in scholarship, charm hiding deceit. As she tucked her knitting into her handbag, she felt a familiar stirring, a sense that the truth was within reach, waiting to be gently teased out like a loose stitch. The suspects had emerged, and with them, the first outlines of a puzzle she was determined to solve. Chapter 3. The Curator's Tale. The afternoon light filtered through the lace curtains of the Rose and Crown Inn, casting delicate patterns on the linen tablecloth where Miss Jane Marple sat, her knitting needles clicking with a rhythm as steady as a metronome. She had chosen the inn's small dining room for its quiet charm, a place where the clink of teacups and the murmur of village gossip created an atmosphere conducive to confidences. Across from her sat Mr. Clarence Winthrop, the curator of the St. Mary's Museum, his thin fingers clutching a cup of tea as if it were an anchor in a storm. His spectacles, slightly fogged from the warm room, slipped down his nose, and he pushed them back with a nervous gesture that Miss Marple noted with interest. She had invited him for tea under the pretense of discussing the museum's history, but her true purpose was to unravel the man behind the curator's title. The dining room was nearly empty, save for a pair of elderly women discussing the flower show in hushed tones, and a waiter polishing silverware with a distracted air. Miss Marple's pale pink shawl lay draped over her lap, her needles weaving a pattern as intricate as the thoughts weaving through her mind. She had always found that a relaxed setting, far from the formalities of an office or the tension of a crime scene, loosened tongues and revealed truths that might otherwise remain hidden. Mr. Winthrop, with his furrowed brow and restless hands, seemed ripe for such a revelation. "It's such a dreadful affair, Mr. Winthrop," Miss Marple began, her voice soft and sympathetic, as if she were merely a concerned visitor. "That beautiful coin, such a loss to the museum. You must feel it keenly, having cared for it all these years." Mr. Winthrop nodded, his shoulders sagging. "It's catastrophic, Miss Marple," he said, his voice tight with strain. "The aureus is, was, the centerpiece of our Roman collection. Minted in 64 AD, under Nero, you know. Gold, perfectly preserved, with his profile so finely struck you could almost see the arrogance in his eyes. It was found not far from here, in a farmer's field, and it's been our pride for a decade." He paused, his fingers tightening around the teacup. "To think it's gone, stolen under my watch." His voice trailed off, and he stared into the tea as if it held answers. Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of gentle concern. "You checked it yourself last night, I understand." "Before locking up?" Yes, he said quickly, almost too quickly. "It's my routine. Every evening I walk the galleries, inspect each exhibit." "The Aureus was in its case at 5:30, just before we closed. I locked the case myself, and the key." He hesitated, his eyes flickering toward the window, where the village green lay quiet under a greying sky. "The key is kept in my office, in a locked drawer. No one could have taken it." Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second, a pause so brief it went unnoticed. She had known men like Mr. Winthrop in St. Mary's Mead, men like Mr. Grayson, the churchwarden, whose meticulous habits masked a private turmoil. The curator's insistence on his routine was convincing, yet his nervous energy suggested something more. Was it guilt, fear, or merely the weight of responsibility? She poured him another cup of tea, her movements deliberate, giving him time to relax. "It must be a great burden, managing such treasures," she said. "I imagine the coin's value makes it a target. Have you had trouble with thieves before?" Mr. Winthrop shook his head, his lips thinning. "Never. The museum is modest, you see. We've no grand security like the British Museum, but we've never needed it. The Aureus, though." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's worth thousands on the black market. Tens of thousands, perhaps. There are collectors, unsavory types, who'd pay anything for it." His eyes widened, as if the thought had just struck him anew. "But I'd never jeopardize my work. 20 years I've given to this museum. My whole career." Miss Marple nodded, her face a mask of understanding, though her mind was cataloguing every word, every gesture. The mention of the black market was telling, not because it was new. Inspector Harrow had said much, the same, but because Mr. Winthrop seemed to dwell on it, as if it haunted him. She recalled a conversation with Mrs. Bantry, her friend from St. Mary's Mead, about a local solicitor who'd fallen into debt and spoke too often of money, betraying his desperation. Was Mr. Winthrop in similar straits? His suit, though neatly pressed, was frayed at the cuffs, and his tie still askew hinted at a man distracted by more than a missing coin. "You've had no trouble with the staff, I suppose?" she asked, her tone light, as if the question were an afterthought. "They all seem so dedicated." "Oh, they are," he said, though his voice lacked conviction. "Mr. Reed, the night guard, is reliable, if a bit gruff. Dr. Hartley, our historian, is brilliant, though she can be particular about the exhibits. And the others, well, they're local folk, trustworthy." He hesitated again, his fingers drumming on the table. "Though I did overhear Dr. Hartley arguing with one of the cleaners about access to the Roman gallery last week. She's very protective of her research materials." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles, though her expression remained unchanged. A small discord among the staff was hardly evidence, but it was a thread to tug. She thought of Miss Pollitt, the village dressmaker, whose quarrels with her assistant had revealed a theft of fabric. Small frictions often hid larger truths. "And visitors?" she pressed gently. "Anyone showing unusual interest in the coin?" Mr. Winthrop frowned, his brow creasing further. Well, there was that gentleman yesterday, Mr. Langston. He asked a great deal about the aureus, more than most visitors. Wanted to know its provenance, its weight, even the alloy. I thought him an enthusiast, but now—" He shook his head as if unwilling to voice suspicion. "But no, it can't be. The case was locked, and the museum was secure." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over his words. Mr. Langston's curiosity was consistent with what Eliza Gray had told her, and it added a new shade to the pattern forming in her thoughts. She noted, too, the curator's reluctance to accuse, as if he feared stirring trouble, or perhaps feared implicating himself. His hands, she observed, trembled slightly as he set down his cup, and his gaze darted to the door, where the waiter was now wiping down a table. Was it the strain of the theft, or something deeper? The dining room grew quieter as the elderly women departed, their chatter about dahlias fading into the distance. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial tone. "You must have records of the coin's history, Mr. Winthrop. Any recent inquiries about it? Perhaps from collectors or scholars?" He blinked, startled by the shift in topic. "Records? Oh yes, we keep detailed logs. Dr. Hartley requested access to them last month for her article, and there was a letter from a London dealer a few weeks ago, asking about the coin's authenticity. I assured him it was genuine, but I didn't think much of it at the time." His voice faltered, and he adjusted his spectacles again, a gesture Miss Marple now recognized as a nervous tic. "A London dealer," she repeated, her tone encouraging. "How interesting! Did he visit?" "No, it was just a letter," Mr. Winthrop said quickly. "I didn't keep it. Routine correspondence, you know. We get such inquiries now and then." He stood, smoothing his jacket with an air of finality. "I really must get back, Miss Marple. Inspector Harrow will want my input on the security arrangements." "Of course," she said, her smile warm but her eyes sharp. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Winthrop. I do hope they find the coin soon." As he left, his steps hurried and uneven, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her needles moving with the same calm precision as her thoughts. The curator's tale had been revealing, not in what he said, but in what he omitted. His nervous demeanour, his quick dismissal of the London dealer, his reluctance to dwell on staff tensions, all were threads in the tapestry of the theft. She thought of Mr. Grayson again, whose nervous chatter had betrayed his pilfering of church funds. Mr. Winthrop, she suspected, was not the thief, but he knew more than he let on, perhaps about the museum's vulnerabilities or his own private struggles. Outside, the village green was growing dim as clouds gathered, casting a sombre light over St. Mary's Mead. Miss Marple tucked her knitting into her handbag and rose, her mind already turning to her next conversation. The curator had given her a glimpse into the museum's inner workings, but there were others to question, other threads to weave. The aureus, with its golden allure, had drawn someone into temptation, and Miss Marple was determined to find out who. As she stepped into the cool afternoon air, her eyes twinkled with the quiet certainty of a woman who knew that human nature, like her knitting, always followed a pattern, if one only knew where to look. Chapter 4. The Guard's Account. The late afternoon air in St. Mary's Mead carried a faint chill, a reminder that summer was giving way to autumn. Miss Jane Marple stood in the museum's courtyard, a small paved area bordered by neatly trimmed hedges, and a stone bench where she now sat, her knitting bag at her side. The courtyard, tucked behind the St. Mary's Museum, was a quiet spot, far from the curious eyes of villagers still gathered at the front gates, whispering about the stolen aureus. Miss Marple had chosen this place to speak with Mr. Thomas Reed, the night guard, knowing that a man of his disposition, gruff, solitary, and wary, might feel more at ease away from the formalities of an office or the bustle of the tea-room. Mr. Reed approached, his heavy boots crunching on the gravel path, his cane tapping a steady rhythm. He was a burly figure, his broad shoulders straining against a worn jacket, his face weathered by years of wind and war. His limp, pronounced but not debilitating, gave his gait an uneven cadence, and Miss Marple noted the strength in his arms as he gripped the cane. She rose to greet him, her smile warm and disarming, as if she were merely a kindly old lady seeking a chat. "Mr. Reed," she said, her voice soft but clear, "how good of you to spare a moment. It must be quite a strain guarding the museum through the night, especially with such a treasure as that coin." He grunted, easing himself onto the bench with a wince. "It's my job," he said, his voice low and gravelly, like stones shifting in a riverbed. "Been doing it 10 years. Never had trouble till now." His eyes, a pale grey, met hers briefly before darting to the museum's back door, a heavy wooden affair with a rusted hinge. Miss Marple followed his glance, her mind noting the door's proximity to the Roman gallery. She resumed her seat, drawing out her knitting. A pale pink shawl lay, its pattern growing steadily under her nimble fingers, and let the needle's gentle clicking fill the silence, a sound that often put others at ease. "You were on duty last night, I understand," she asked, her tone conversational, as if discussing the village fete. "It must be lonely, patrolling those dark halls." "Aye," he said, shifting his weight. "I make my rounds every hour. Check the doors, the windows, the cases. All was as it should be at midnight, and at 2, and at 4. The coin was there when I passed the gallery at 5, just before my shift ended." His jaw tightened, and he leaned on his cane, his knuckles widening. "No one got in, Miss Marple. I'd have heard 'em. That door," he nodded toward the back entrance, "is loud as thunder when it opens." Miss Marple's needles paused for a moment, a subtle acknowledgement of his words. She thought of Mr. Jenkins, the St. Mary's Mead gardener, whose gruff assurances about his locked shed had failed to hide a pilfered rake. Men like Reed, she knew, took pride in their vigilance, but pride could blind them to small oversights. "Your routine sounds very thorough," she said, her voice encouraging, "and with your injury, it must take great determination. How did it happen, if I may ask?" "War," he said curtly, his eyes narrowing. "Shrapnel in the leg first war. Slows me down, but I manage. Don't need to run to do my job." His tone was defensive, and Miss Marple sensed a man accustomed to proving his worth despite his limitations. She nodded sympathetically, her needles resuming their rhythm, but her mind was alert. A guard with a limp might miss a quiet footstep, she thought, especially if distracted. And that glance toward the back door, instinctive, almost guilty, suggested more than routine concern. "You must know the museum's every corner," she said, her tone light. "No one could slip past you. I'm, sure, but I suppose visitors come and go during the day." Did anyone stand out yesterday? Someone lingering, perhaps?" Reed frowned, his thick brows knitting together. Plenty of folk come through. That Langston fellow was about asking questions. Wanted to know about the coin's history, how we kept it safe. Thought he was just nosy, but now... He shrugged, his shoulders hunching. "Didn't see him do anything odd, mind. He left before closing, far as I know." His words were clipped, as if he regretted saying even that much. Miss Marple noted the mention of Mr. Langston, consistent with what Eliza and Mr. Winthrop had said, but her attention lingered on Reed's reluctance. Was it caution, or something deeper? She tilted her head, her expression one of gentle curiosity. "The back door, Mr. Reed. Does it see much use? Deliveries, perhaps? It must be convenient for bringing in supplies." His eyes flicked to the door again, and for a moment his face tightened. "Aye, we get deliveries now and then. Cleaning stuff, mostly. It's locked at night, though. I check it myself." He shifted on the bench, his cane tapping the ground once, twice. Miss Marple's needles clicked steadily, but her mind seized on the pause in his words, the way his gaze lingered on the door. She recalled Mrs. Price, the village baker, whose nervous glances at her shop's back entrance had betrayed a secret meeting with a smuggler. Small gestures, she knew, often spoke louder than words. "And last night," she pressed gently, "all was quiet. No deliveries, no unexpected visitors." "Nothing," he said firmly, but his voice held a trace of strain. "Just me and the museum, same as always. Handed over to the day shift at 6, and that's when they found the case empty." He stood abruptly, leaning heavily on his cane. "I've got to get back, Miss Marple. Inspector Harrow's waiting for my report." "Of course," she said, her smile warm, but her eyes sharp. "You've been very kind to humour an old lady's curiosity. I do hope this business is sorted soon." As Reed limped toward the back door, Miss Marple watched him go, her knitting needles moving with mechanical precision. His account was plausible, even convincing, but there were cracks in its surface. His defensive tone, his repeated glances at the door, his reluctance to elaborate. She thought of the back door's rusted hinge, which he'd called loud as thunder, and wondered if a careful hand could ease it open quietly. She also recalled the cleaner's whisper about the door being left ajar for deliveries, a detail Reed had not mentioned. Was it an oversight or a deliberate omission? The courtyard grew still as the afternoon light faded, the hedges casting long shadows across the gravel. Miss Marple tucked her knitting into her bag, her mind weaving together the threads of Reed's account. He was a man of duty, she thought. But duty could be a mask for other motives, loyalty to someone else, perhaps, or a need to protect a secret. She recalled Mr. Jenkins again, whose pride in his garden had hidden a small theft to settle a debt. Reed's limp, his war wound, made him seem vulnerable, but his strength and vigilance suggested he was no easy mark. Had he missed something in the night, or had he chosen to look away? As she rose from the bench, her eyes lingered on the back door, its weathered wood and rusted hinge a silent witness to the museum's secrets. The aureus with its golden allure had tempted someone, and Mr. Reed, with his steady rounds and watchful eyes, was either a guardian or a gatekeeper. Miss Marple's lips curved into a faint smile. The guard's account had added new threads to her pattern, and she was beginning to see the shape of the puzzle. As she walked back toward the village, her steps light despite the gathering dusk. She knew her next conversation would bring her closer to the truth, one careful stitch at a time. Chapter 5. The Historian's Motive. The St. Mary's Museum Library, a dim room lined with oak shelves and heavy tomes, smelled faintly of old paper and polished wood. Miss Jane Marple sat at a long table near a window, her knitting bag resting beside a stack of books on Roman history. The afternoon had deepened into a soft grey, the light filtering through leaded panes to cast a muted glow over the room. She had chosen this setting to meet Dr. Evelyn Hartley, the museum's historian, knowing that a scholar's domain would put her at ease, much as a garden soothed a gardener or a kitchen comforted a cook. Miss Marple's pale pink shawl lay across her lap, her needles clicking with a gentle rhythm that belied the sharpness of her observations. She had a way of blending into such settings, her unassuming presence encouraging candour where suspicion might otherwise close doors. Dr. Hartley entered, her tall frame moving with a precision that spoke of confidence and discipline. Her tailored blazer and silver brooch gleamed faintly, and her wire-rimmed glasses caught the light as she adjusted them with a practiced gesture. She carried a leather-bound notebook, its edges worn from use, and her sharp features softened only slightly, as she acknowledged Miss Marple with a nod. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice crisp but not unkind. "I understand you're taking an interest in this unfortunate business with the coin. I'm not sure what I can add, but I'm happy to assist." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes warm behind her spectacles. "How kind of you, Doctor. Hartley," she said, her tone as gentle as a summer breeze. "I'm merely a visitor, of course, but I find the loss of such a treasure quite distressing. You must feel it deeply, given your expertise." She gestured to the chair opposite, and Dr. Hartley sat, placing her notebook on the table with a care that suggested it was a prized possession. "It's a blow to scholarship," Dr. Hartley said, her words measured but tinged with a quiet intensity. "The aureus is, was a singular artifact. Minted under Nero, its craftsmanship is extraordinary. The emperor's profile, the laurel wreath, the inscriptions detailing his titles. It's not just gold, it's a window into a civilization." Her fingers brushed the notebook, as if grounding herself in its familiar weight. To lose it to a thief is intolerable. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, a soothing counterpoint to the historian's fervour. She thought of Miss Cranston, the saint, Mary's Mead schoolmistress, whose passion for rare books had once led her to lock away a first edition, claiming it was too precious for careless hands. Scholars, Miss Marple knew, could be as possessive as collectors, their motives cloaked in the guise of preservation. "You've studied the coin closely, I believe?" she asked, her voice light. "Your recent article must have brought it much attention." Dr. Hartley's eyes brightened briefly, a flicker of pride. "Yes, I published a piece in the Journal of Numismatic Studies last month. It focused on the coin's iconography, how Nero's image was used to project power. I spent hours examining it, sketching every detail." She paused, her fingers tightening on the notebook. "I suppose that makes me a suspect in Inspector Harrow's eyes, but I assure you, my interest is purely academic." Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest, though her mind was cataloguing every nuance. The historian's passion was genuine, but passion could be a double-edged sword. She recalled a conversation with Mrs. Bantry about a vicar who'd borrowed a church relic, convinced it was safer in his study. "You were working late yesterday, I understand," she asked, her tone conversational. "In your office here?" "Yes," Dr. Hartley said, her voice steady. "I was revising a draft until nearly 9. The museum was quiet by then, just Mr. Reed on his rounds. I locked my office when I left and went straight home." Her alibi was precise, almost rehearsed, and Miss Marple noted the way her fingers lingered on the brooch. A subtle gesture that betrayed a trace of unease. She thought of Miss Pollitt, the village dressmaker, whose precise accounts of her day had unravelled under gentle questioning. "It must be difficult working so late," Miss Marple said, her needles pausing for a moment. "No disturbances, I hope. No visitors or deliveries to interrupt you." Dr. Hartley shook her head. "None. The museum is like a tomb after hours. I heard Mr. Reed's cane tapping now and then, but that's all." Her lips thinned, and she added almost as an afterthought, "Though I did notice Mr. Winthrop seemed agitated yesterday. He was in his office, shuffling papers, when I passed by around 7. I thought it odd. He usually leaves earlier." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles, though her face remained serene. The mention of the curator's agitation was a new thread, one that aligned with her own observations of his nervous demeanour. She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a confiding tone. "You must know the museum's routines well, Doctor. Hartley. The display cases, for instance. How are they secured?" The historian's brow furrowed, as if the question surprised her. "Each case has its own key, kept in Mr. Winthrop's office. Only he and the senior staff have access, though I rarely handle them myself. My work is with documents, not artifacts." She hesitated, then added, "I did suggest once that we improve the locks. Some are quite old, but Mr. Winthrop said the budget wouldn't allow it." Her tone held a hint of disapproval, and Miss Marple filed it away, recalling Mr. Winthrop's mention of Dr. Hartley's disputes over exhibit control. The library was silent save for the faint creak of the building settling and the distant murmur of voices from the museum's entrance. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, and she tilted her head, her expression one of mild curiosity. "And visitors?" "I suppose many come to see the coin, especially after your article. Anyone particularly memorable?" Dr. Hartley's lips pursed, and she adjusted her glasses with a deliberate gesture. "Most of the usual sort. Tourists, school groups. But there was that man, Mr. Langston, yesterday. He was very inquisitive, asking about the coin's provenance and security. I thought him a bit forward, but he seemed knowledgeable, so I answered briefly and moved on." Her voice was cool, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of unease in her eyes, as if the memory troubled her. The mention of Mr. Langston, consistent with what others had said, added another stitch to Miss Marple's pattern. She thought of young Tommy Pierce, whose probing questions about a neighbour's silver had preceded a theft. Charm and curiosity, she knew, could be tools of deceit. "He must have been quite taken with the coin," she said, her tone encouraging. "Did he linger long?" "Not unduly," Dr. Hartley replied, but her fingers tightened on the brooch again, a gesture Miss Marple noted with interest. "He left the gallery before closing, as far as I saw. I was busy with my notes." Her words were clipped, as if she wished to close the topic. Miss Marple smiled, letting the silence linger. a tactic that often prompted more, but Dr. Hartley remained composed, her gaze steady. The historian rose, smoothing her blazer. "I should get back to my work, Miss Marple. This theft has disrupted my schedule terribly." She picked up her notebook, clutching it to her chest. "I trust Inspector Harrow will resolve this quickly." "I'm sure he will," Miss Marple said, her voice warm, but her eyes sharp. "You've been most helpful, Dr. Hartley. I do hope the coin is found soon. It would be a shame to lose such a treasure." As Dr. Hartley left, her heels clicking on the polished floor, Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her mind turning over the conversation. The historian's account was polished, her alibi firm, but there were cracks beneath the surface. The unease in her gestures, the mention of Mr. Winthrop's agitation, the hint of tension over the museum's security. Miss Marple thought of Miss Cranston again, whose love for her books had bordered on obsession, and wondered if Dr. Hartley's scholarly passion could have tipped into something more possessive. The coin's value was not just financial, but intellectual, and such value could tempt even the most disciplined mind. The library grew dim as the grey light faded, and Miss Marple tucked her knitting into her bag. She rose, her steps light despite the weight of her thoughts. Dr. Hartley's motive, if she had one, was not greed but something deeper, perhaps a desire to protect or possess the coin's legacy. Yet her precise manner and firm alibi suggested a woman in control, not easily swayed by impulse. Still, Miss Marple knew that control could mask calculation, just as passion could hide intent. As she left the library, the museum's quiet halls stretching before her, she felt the puzzle's pieces shifting, the pattern growing clearer with each conversation. The historian's motive was one thread among many, but it was a thread she would follow, stitch by careful stitch. Chapter 6. The Visitor's Charm. The village cafe, a cosy establishment called the Blue Teapot, nestled in the heart of St. Mary's Mead, was alive with the gentle hum of late-afternoon conversation. Its checkered tablecloths and mismatched chairs gave it a homely charm, and the scent of fresh scones mingled with the aroma of brewing tea. Miss Jane Marple sat at a corner table, by a window overlooking the High Street, her knitting bag at her side and a pot of Earl Grey before her. She had chosen this setting to meet Mr. Victor Langston, the visitor whose name had surfaced in every account of the stolen aureus, knowing that a public yet intimate venue might loosen the tongue of a man accustomed to polished settings. Her pale pink shawl lay across her lap, her needles clicking with a rhythm that seemed to blend into the cafe's background, rendering her presence almost invisible to casual observers. Yet her sharp eyes, hidden behind spectacles, missed nothing. Mr. Langston entered with the confidence of a man who knew he drew attention. He was in his early 40s, tall and impeccably dressed in a tailored grey suit, his dark hair sleek and his gold cufflinks catching the light as he adjusted his scarf. His smile, broad and disarming, was the kind that could charm a room, and he offered it freely as he spotted Miss Marple and approached her table. "Miss Marple, I presume," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, carrying a trace of a London accent. "How delightful to meet you. I understand you're taking an interest in this unfortunate business at the museum." Miss Marple returned his smile, her expression warm, but her gaze keen. "Mr. Langston, "How kind of you to join me," she said, her voice soft and inviting, as if she were merely a curious old lady indulging in village gossip. "It's such a shocking affair, the loss of that coin. I thought you might share your impressions, being a visitor here." She gestured to the chair opposite, and he sat, his movements graceful, almost theatrical. "A tragedy, truly," he said, leaning back with an air of ease. "That aureus was a marvel, pure gold, struck with Nero's likeness. I saw it yesterday during my visit, and I confess I was captivated. Such craftsmanship is rare." His eyes sparkled with enthusiasm, but Miss Marple noted a calculated quality to his words, as if they were rehearsed. She thought of Tommy Pierce, the saint, Mary's mead charmer whose silver tongue had masked a penchant for petty theft. Men like Langston, she knew, used charm as both a shield and a weapon. "You're an enthusiast of antiquities, I hear?" she asked, pouring him a cup of tea with a steady hand. Her needles continued their gentle clicking, a soothing backdrop that encouraged candour. "Indeed," he replied, accepting the cup with a nod. "I dabble in collecting. Greek vases, Roman bronzes, the occasional coin. Nothing on the scale of a museum, of course, but enough to appreciate a piece like the aureus. I was passing through St. Mary's Mead on business, and couldn't resist a visit to the museum." His smile widened, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance toward the window, as if he were checking for onlookers. She recalled young Tommy's habit of scanning a room before spinning his tales, and her interest sharpened. "How fortunate that you saw the coin before it vanished," she said, her tone light. "You were there yesterday, I believe. Did you find the museum well guarded?" "Oh, quite," he said, his voice smooth. "The staff were attentive, and that guard, Mr. Reed, is it, seemed diligent despite his limp. I spent some time in the Roman gallery, admiring the exhibits. The aureus was the highlight, naturally. I asked a few questions, its history, its value, pure curiosity, you understand." He sipped his tea, his eyes meeting hers over the rim of the cup, and Miss Marple noted a flicker of amusement, as if he enjoyed the game of conversation. She nodded, her needles pausing for a moment. "Curiosity is so natural in a place like that," she said. "I suppose you spoke with the curator, or perhaps Dr. Hartley? They must have been pleased with your interest." "Both, briefly," he said, his tone casual. "The curator, Mr. Winthrop, seemed a bit distracted, but he answered my questions about the coin's provenance. Dr. Hartley was less forthcoming, absorbed in her work, I think. I didn't linger long, had to catch the evening train to London, though I wandered the village a bit first. Alibi was vague, delivered with a practised ease, and Miss Marple's mind filed it away, noting its lack of specifics. She thought of Mr. Carver, the St. Mary's Mead jeweller, whose vague accounts of his evenings had hidden a gambling habit. "The village is charming, isn't it?" she said, her voice warm. "Did you enjoy your stroll? I find the lanes so peaceful after dusk." He hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, before his smile returned. "Very much. I wandered down by the church, then back to the station. Nothing eventful, I'm afraid." His fingers brushed the gold cufflinks, and Miss Marple's eyes lingered on them, noting their intricate design, a stylized laurel wreath, reminiscent of Roman motifs. A small detail, but one that suggested a deeper connection to antiquities than he let on. She leaned forward slightly, her tone confiding. "You must hear all sorts of stories in your collecting circles, Mr. Langston. I've read about the black market for such treasures. Is it as thrilling as it sounds?" Her question was innocent, almost playful, but her eyes were sharp, watching for his reaction. He laughed, a low, easy sound, but his fingers tightened briefly on the teacup. "Oh, the stories are exaggerated, Miss Marple. Collectors are a passionate lot, but most of us are law-abiding. The black market, well, it's a shadowy world, and I steer clear. Too much risk for my taste." His words were smooth, but Miss Marple caught the slight shift in his posture, the way his eyes darted to the window again. She thought of Tommy Pierce, whose denials had grown more elaborate as suspicion closed in. The cafe was quiet now, save for the clink of dishes in the kitchen and the murmur of a couple at a nearby table. Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, and she tilted her head, her expression one of mild curiosity. "You must have met many collectors in London," she said. "Do they ever inquire about pieces like the Aureus? I imagine it's the sort of thing that sparks interest." "Occasionally," he said, his tone guarded. "I had a colleague ask about it a few weeks ago, after Dr. Hartley's article came out. Just casual interest, you know. Nothing serious." He set down his cup, his smile unwavering, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers lingered on the cufflinks, as if seeking reassurance. She recalled a conversation with Mrs. Bantry about a London dealer who'd visited St. Mary's Mead, his casual inquiries masking a scheme to swindle an elderly widow. Casual interest, she knew, could be a prelude to calculation. "You've been most kind to indulge me, Mr. Langston," she said, her voice warm. "I'm sure Inspector Harrow will appreciate your insights. It's such a pity about the coin. I do hope it's recovered soon." "As do I," he said, rising with a graceful nod. "A pleasure, Miss Marple. If you'll excuse me, I have some business to attend to." He left a few coins on the table for the tea and departed, his stride confident, but his glance lingering on the street outside. Miss Marple watched him go, her knitting needles moving steadily. His charm was undeniable, but it was a polished veneer, one she'd seen in rogues like Tommy Pierce. His vague alibi, his interest in the coin, his mention of a London colleague, all were threads in the pattern she was weaving. The cufflinks, with their Roman design, suggested a man who surrounded himself with antiquities, perhaps too closely for mere enthusiasm. And that fleeting tension when she mentioned the black market, it was a crack in his facade, small but telling. As the cafe's light dimmed with the approaching evening, Miss Marple tucked her knitting into her bag and sipped the last of her tea. The village outside was settling into its quiet rhythms, but her mind was far from still. Mr. Langston's charm was a tool, she thought, one that could open doors or conceal motives. She recalled the cleaner's whisper about the museum's back door, the curator's nervousness, the guard's defensiveness, the historian's passion, all pieces of a puzzle that pointed to a calculated theft. Mr. Langston, with his smooth words and golden adornments, was a central figure, but whether he was the thief or merely a player in a larger game remained to be seen. As she rose to leave, her eyes twinkled with the quiet certainty of a woman who knew that charm, like knitting, could unravel with the right pull. Chapter 7. The Museum's Secrets. The St. Mary's Museum stood silent in the early evening, its stone facade softened by the fading light of a late summer dusk. Inside, the galleries were empty, the velvet ropes still barring the Roman exhibit where the Aureus had vanished. Miss Jane Marple wandered the halls, her footsteps muffled on the polished oak floors, her knitting bag slung over her arm. She had returned to the museum after her conversation with Mr. Langston, drawn by a sense that the building itself held clues yet to be uncovered. Her pale pink shawl trailed slightly as she moved, her needles tucked away for now, her sharp eyes scanning every detail. The placement of the display cases, the shadows in the corners, the faint creak of a floorboard underfoot. To the casual observer, she was merely an elderly visitor, lingering too long after hours. But Miss Marple knew that secrets often hid in plain sight, waiting for a patient eye to find them. The museum's staff had largely dispersed, leaving only a skeleton crew to assist Inspector Harrow, who was still in the curator's office, poring over security logs. Miss Marple had slipped in with a quiet word to the young assistant, Eliza Gray, claiming a forgotten scarf in the tea room. Eliza, flustered but trusting, had let her pass. And now Miss Marple moved with purpose, her mind attuned to the subtle discord she'd sensed in her conversations. The curator's nervousness, the guard's defensiveness, the historian's precision, the visitor's charm, all were threads, but the museum itself was the loom on which they were woven. She paused before the empty display case in the Roman gallery, its glass gleaming under the dim overhead lights. The velvet cushion, once home to the aureus, bore a faint indentation, a ghostly reminder of the coin's presence. Miss Marple leaned closer, her spectacles glinting as she examined the lock. It was a simple mechanism, old but sturdy, with no scratches or signs of tampering. She straightened, her lips pursing slightly. A thief with a key, she thought, or one clever enough to bypass the lock entirely. She recalled Mr. Simmons, the St. Mary's Mead locksmith, who'd once shown her how a skilled hand could pick a lock with nothing more than a hairpin. But this lock, she suspected, had not been picked. It had been opened properly. Her gaze drifted to the gallery's edges, where a narrow corridor led to the museum's back rooms. She followed it, her steps deliberate, until she reached the back door she'd heard mentioned by the cleaner and noticed by Mr. Reed. It was a heavy wooden door, its paint chipped, its rusted hinge groaning softly as she tested it. Not as loud as thunder, she thought, despite Reed's claim, but certainly noticeable to a guard on his rounds, unless he was distracted or complicit. She noted a faint scuff mark on the floor, as if the door had been opened recently, and a small pile of dust in the corner, undisturbed. No heavy traffic then, but a single careful entry was possible. She filed the detail away, her mind turning to the cleaner's whisper about deliveries left unchecked. As she returned to the main hall, she overheard voices from the tea room, a low, hurried exchange between two staff members. Miss Marple slipped closer, her silhouette blending with the shadows, her ears attuned. It was Eliza Gray and a cleaner, Mrs. Baxter, a stout woman with a voice like a kettle on the boil. "It's not right," Mrs. Baxter was saying, her tone sharp. "Mr. Winthrop's been at 6s and 7s for weeks, ever since that London fellow wrote about the coin. And Dr. Hartley, she's been snapping at everyone, wanting the gallery to herself, thinks she owns the place." Eliza's voice was softer, nervous. But they wouldn't steal it, would they? Mr. Winthrop's so proud of the museum, and Dr. Hartley's all about her books and papers. "Pride don't pay debts," Mrs. Baxter retorted. "I heard from my cousin at the bank. Mr. Winthrop's been borrowing heavy, gambling or some such, and Dr. Hartley's not as saintly as she looks. She was in a right state when Mr. Winthrop wouldn't let her move the coin for her photographs last month. The conversation paused as footsteps approached, and the women moved off, their voices fading. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. The gossip was unverified, but it echoed her own observations, Mr. Winthrop's nervous tics, Dr. Hartley's possessive tone. She thought of Mrs. Price, the St. Mary's Mead baker, whose debts had led her to smuggle goods through her shop's back door. Debt and ambition, she knew, were powerful motives, and the museum's quiet halls hid more than artifacts. She resumed her wander, pausing by a bulletin board near the staff entrance, where a schedule listed delivery times. A note, scrawled in pencil, caught her eye. Cleaning supplies, 6 p.m. back door. No date, but the ink was fresh. She recalled Mr. Reed's insistence that the door was locked at night, and her lips pursed again. A discrepancy, however small, was a thread to tug. Moving to the curator's office door, left ajar. She glimpsed Inspector Harrow inside, his broad frame hunched over a desk littered with papers. She knocked lightly, and he looked up, his moustache twitching with surprise. "Miss Marple," he said, his tone a mix of respect and exasperation. "Still here, are you? I'm up to my neck in logs and statements." "I won't keep you, Inspector," she said, her voice gentle. "I only wondered if you'd checked the delivery records. I heard there was one last evening through the back door." She offered the tidbit as if it were a passing thought, her expression one of innocent curiosity. Harrow's brow furrowed. "Delivery?" Reed didn't mention it. Said the door was locked all night. "I'll look into it." He jotted a note, and Miss Marple nodded, satisfied. She knew better than to press too hard. Men like Harrow preferred to think they'd found the clues themselves. She excused herself, her mind already turning to the staff schedule and the cleaner's gossip. As she stepped back into the main hall, she noticed a small alcove near the Roman gallery, where a display of Roman tools was arranged. One item, a slender bronze pick used for engraving, caught her eye. It was slightly misaligned, as if recently handled, and its pointed end could, in skilled hands, manipulate a lock. She thought of Mr. Langston's cufflinks, their Roman design, and wondered if his enthusiasm extended to such tools. She also recalled Dr. Hartley's access to the gallery and Mr. Winthrop's keys, each a potential link to the theft. The museum, she realized, was a maze of possibilities, its secrets embedded in its routines and rivalries. The air grew cooler as night approached, and Miss Marple made her way to the exit, her knitting bag swinging lightly. The museum's secrets were beginning to surface. Mr. Winthrop's debts, Doctor. Hartley's ambitions, Mr. Reed's omissions, Mr. Langston's curiosity. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and the back door, with its rusted hinge and scuff mark, was a focal point. She thought of Mr. Carver, the St. Mary's Mead jeweller, whose back entrance had been his undoing, used to slip stolen goods to a buyer. The aureus, with its golden allure, had drawn someone through that door, she was certain. And the museum's quiet facade hid the truth. As she stepped into the evening, the village lights twinkling in the distance, Miss Marple's mind was alight with connections. The museum's secrets were not in its artifacts, but in its people, their fears, their desires, their hidden acts. She smiled faintly, her steps steady despite the gathering dark. The pattern was taking shape, and with it, the outline of the thief. She would return to the village tomorrow, her needles ready to weave the next thread, knowing that the truth, like her knitting, would emerge with patience and care. Chapter 8. A Village Clue. The morning mist hung low over St. Mary's Mead, softening the outlines of the village's thatched cottages and cobblestone lanes. Miss Jane Marple walked briskly along the high street, her sensible shoes tapping a steady rhythm, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. The air carried the scent of damp grass and baking bread, a familiar comfort that reminded her of her own village, where secrets often surfaced in the most ordinary places. She was headed to the post office, a modest building with a red-tiled roof, where Mrs. Cobb, the postmistress, presided over the village's correspondence and gossip with equal authority. Miss Marple had learned, through years of quiet observation, that post offices were treasure troves of information, their counters a stage for the small dramas of village life. Today she hoped to find a clue to the stolen aureus, a thread to pull from the tangle of motives and alibis she'd gathered. The post office was a hive of activity, with villagers collecting parcels and exchanging news about the museum theft. Mrs. Cobb, a stout woman with a sharp eye and a sharper tongue, stood behind the counter, sorting letters with the precision of a general marshalling troops. Her grey hair was pinned tightly, and her apron was crisp, a testament to her pride in her domain. Miss Marple approached, her smile warm and unassuming, her pale pink shawl draped neatly over her shoulders. "Good morning, Mrs. Cobb," she said, her voice soft but clear. "What a busy morning you're having. I do hope it's not too taxing." Mrs. Cobb looked up, her face softening at the sight of Miss Marple. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's a right to do with this coin business," she said, setting aside a stack of envelopes. "Everyone's talking, and half of 'em think they know who did it. I've had to shush more than one gossip this morning." She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Mind you, I've my own thoughts, but I keep them to myself." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles, though her expression remained one of polite interest. She knew women like Mrs. Cobb. Her own village had Mrs. Weatherby, whose post office counter was a fountain of indiscretions. A gentle nudge, she'd found, could turn such women into unwitting allies. "It's dreadful, isn't it?" she said, leaning on the counter, as if sharing a confidence. "That beautiful coin, gone in the night. I suppose you see all sorts come through here. Visitors, perhaps, sending parcels or letters?" Mrs. Cobb nodded, her fingers pausing over a parcel slip. "Oh, aye, we get the odd stranger, especially with the museum drawing folks. Yesterday, that Mr. Langston was in, sending a parcel to London. Heavy it was, and he was particular about it being insured. Paid extra for express delivery, too." She raised an eyebrow, her tone suggesting she found the transaction noteworthy. "Seemed in a hurry, if you ask me." Miss Marple's needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to itch for action. Though she kept her hand still, the mention of Mr. Langston's parcel was a bright thread in the pattern she was weaving. She thought of Mr. Carver, the St. Mary's Mead jeweller, who'd once mailed stolen goods under the guise of a routine package. "How interesting," she said, her voice light. A heavy parcel, you say? I suppose it was books or some such. Collectors do love their treasures." Mrs. Cobb snorted softly. "Books, maybe, but it was wrapped tight, like he didn't want anyone peeking. Addressed to some dealer in London. Antiques, I reckon, from the name. I wrote it down, as I do for insured parcels." She rummaged under the counter and produced a ledger, flipping to a page marked with yesterday's date. "Here it is. Mr. Victor Langston to a Mr. Reginald Thorne, antiquities dealer, Mayfair, posted at 4 o'clock. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a habit when a clue slotted into place. The timing, 4 o'clock before the museum closed, meant Langston could have acted swiftly after his visit, perhaps concealing the coin in the parcel. She recalled his vague alibi about strolling the village and the cufflinks with their Roman design, hinting at a deeper interest in antiquities. "You're very thorough, Mrs. Cobb," she said, her tone admiring. "It must be a comfort, keeping such careful records. Did Mr. Langston seem anxious at all?" "A bit," Mrs. Cobb admitted, warming to the conversation. "Kept looking out the window, like he expected someone to follow him. Mind you, he was all smiles, charming as you please, but I know a nervous man when I see one. Reminds me of that time Mr. Grayson sent off those church funds, all jumpy-like." She shook her head, unaware of how closely her words echoed Miss Marple's own thoughts. The post office door jingled as a customer entered, and Mrs. Cobb turned to serve them, giving Miss Marple a moment to reflect. The parcel to a London dealer was a significant clue, but not proof. The coin, small and flat, could easily be hidden in a package, especially one wrapped tightly, as Mrs. Cobb described. Yet Langston's charm and haste suggested a man accustomed to covering his tracks. She thought of Tommy Pierce, whose quick smiles had disarmed suspicion until a misplaced receipt betrayed him. As Mrs. Cobb returned, Miss Marple steered the conversation to the museum's staff, knowing village gossip often revealed what formal interviews missed. "The museum must be in an uproar," she said, her voice sympathetic. "I suppose you hear all sorts about Mr. Winthrop and his team. They seem so dedicated." Mrs. Cobb's eyes gleamed with the delight of sharing news. Dedicated, maybe, but not without their troubles. "My cousin at the bank says Mr. Winthrop's been borrowing more than he can repay, gambling, they reckon. And that Dr. Hartley, always so high and mighty, had a right row with him last month over the coin. Wanted it for some study, but he wouldn't have it. As for Mr. Reed, the guard, well, my nephew saw him arguing with a stranger near the museum's back door last week. Shady sort, he said, not from round here." Miss Marple's needles would have clicked faster if they were in her hands. The mention of Reed's argument was new, a thread that tugged at her earlier suspicions about the back door. She recalled the scuff mark on the floor, the rusted hinge, and Reed's insistence that the door was locked. An argument with a stranger suggested a connection outside the museum, perhaps a deal gone wrong or a planned theft. "How curious," she said, her tone mild. "A stranger, you say? I suppose the village sees all sorts with the museum drawing visitors." "Aye," Mrs. Cobb said, lowering her voice. "My nephew didn't recognize him. Tall, dark coat, kept his hat low. They were by the back gate, near the delivery entrance. Reed looked proper cross, waving his cane. My nephew didn't hear much, but it wasn't friendly." She paused, then added, "Mind you, I don't say Reed's involved, but he's not one for idle chatter." "Makes you wonder." Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. The stranger could be a key figure, a buyer, a partner, or even a distraction. She thought of Mrs. Price, the village baker, whose backdoor dealings had been uncovered by a neighbour's chance observation. The museum's back door, left ajar for deliveries, was a weak point, and Reed's argument suggested he knew more than he'd admitted. As for Mr. Winthrop's debts and Dr. Hartley's dispute, they added depth to the pattern, but Langston's parcel remained the brightest thread, its timing and destination too precise to ignore. The post office grew busier as more villagers trickled in, their voices buzzing with speculation about the theft. Miss Marple thanked Mrs. Cobb, her smile warm, but her eyes sharp. "You've been most helpful, Mrs. Cobb," she said. "I'll not keep you from your work. I do hope this business is cleared up soon." As she stepped into the misty street, her knitting bag swinging lightly, Miss Marple's mind wove together the new clues. Langston's parcel to a London dealer, sent hours before the theft was discovered, pointed to a planned act, not an impulse. Reed's argument with a stranger suggested a hidden alliance or conflict, one tied to the back door's vulnerability. Winthrop's debts and Hartley's ambitions were shadows in the background, motives that could yet play a role. She thought of her own village, where secrets surfaced in the chatter of shops and post offices, and knew that St. Mary's Mead was no different. The clue lay in the village's pulse, its small details, parcels, arguments, glances that revealed the human heart. Miss Marple turned toward the inn, her steps steady despite the damp cobblestones. She would share the parcel detail with Inspector Harrow, framing it as a passing observation to avoid ruffling his pride. The pattern was growing clearer, the threads tightening around a figure whose charm and haste betrayed him. As the mist swirled around her, she smiled faintly, her mind as sharp as her needles. The village had given her a clue, and with it she was one stitch closer to unravelling the truth. Chapter 9. The Trap is Set. The evening air in St. Mary's Mead was thick with the scent of damp earth and fading roses, the village settling into a hush as twilight deepened. Miss Jane Marple sat in the museum's tea room, a cosy enclave of lace curtains and chipped porcelain, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on her pale pink shawl. The room was nearly empty, save for a lone cleaner sweeping the floor, and the dim light cast long shadows across the checkered tiles. Miss Marple had chosen this spot for its view of the museum's main hall, where she could observe without being noticed, her unassuming presence blending into the background like a familiar piece of furniture. Her conversations with the curator, the guard, the historian, and the visitor had woven a pattern in her mind. And now, with the clue of Mr. Langston's parcel fresh from the post office, she felt the threads tightening around a solution. It was time, she decided, to set a trap. She had shared her findings with Inspector Harrow earlier that day, approaching him with the deference he preferred, her tone that of a helpful but slightly muddled old lady. "I happened to hear at the post office, Inspector," she'd said, her eyes wide with feigned surprise, "that Mr. Langston sent a heavy parcel to a London dealer yesterday afternoon. It's probably nothing, but I thought you should know." Harrow, his moustache twitching with interest, had jotted it down, promising to follow up. She'd also mentioned the back door's frequent use for deliveries, planting the seed without pressing too hard. Men like Harrow, she knew, worked best when they thought the idea was theirs. Now, as she sat in the tea room, Miss Marple's plan was taking shape. She had suggested to Harrow a subtle ruse. The museum would announce a new lead in the case, hinting that the thief's identity was close to being revealed. The announcement, made discreetly through the village grapevine, would reach the suspects without alarming them unduly. A decoy coin, a convincing replica from the museum's educational collection, would be placed in the curator's office in a glass case left temptingly accessible. Harrow, initially skeptical, had agreed, persuaded by the prospect of catching the thief in action. Miss Marple, of course, had no intention of taking credit. Her role was to observe, to nudge, to let human nature reveal itself. The museum was quieter than usual. The day's visitors gone, and the staff reduced to a skeleton crew. Miss Marple's needles clicked rhythmically, her eyes scanning the hall through the tea room's open door. She had positioned herself to see the corridor leading to Mr. Winthrop's office, where the decoy coin now sat, its gold-like sheen glinting under a desk lamp. The announcement had been made that morning. A carefully worded notice in the village paper, amplified by Mrs. Cobb's chatter at the post office. Museum authorities report a breakthrough in the theft of the Nero Aureus, with evidence pointing to an imminent arrest. The words were vague but potent, designed to unsettle the guilty. As the clock struck 7, Miss Marple's patience was rewarded. Mr. Victor Langston appeared in the main hall, his tailored coat immaculate, his gold cufflinks catching the light as he adjusted his scarf. His presence was not unexpected. He'd been seen in the village all day, ostensibly on business, but his timing so soon after the announcement was telling. Miss Marple's needles slowed, her gaze sharpening behind her spectacles. Langston paused by the Roman gallery, his eyes darting toward the cordoned-off display case, then moved toward the corridor leading to the curator's office. His stride was casual, but Miss Marple noted a tension in his shoulders, a slight hesitation as he glanced around. She thought of Tommy Pierce, the saint, Mary's Mead rogue, whose confidence had faltered when cornered by suspicion. Langston's charm, she suspected, was a mask now stretched thin. She recalled the parcel to the London dealer, the Roman motif on his cufflinks, his vague alibi of strolling the village. The back door, with its scuff mark and rusted hinge, loomed in her mind, a point of entry for a thief with a key or a plan. Langston's interest in the coin, noted by every witness, and his hurried parcel suggested a man with a purpose, one that went beyond mere enthusiasm. As Langston neared the office, Miss Marple's needles stopped entirely. She set her knitting aside, her movements slow to avoid drawing attention, and leaned forward slightly, her eyes fixed on the corridor. The cleaner had moved to another room, and the hall was empty save for Langston, who paused at the office door, his hand resting on the knob. Miss Marple's heart quickened, though her face remained serene. She had seen this moment before in her village. Mr. Carver, the jeweller, caught slipping into a back room to retrieve a stolen brooch. Human nature, she knew, followed its predictable patterns when pressed. Langston pushed the door open, his movements cautious but deliberate. Inside, the decoy coin gleamed in its case, left carelessly on Mr. Winthrop's desk by Harrow's design. Miss Marple watched as Langston stepped inside, his hand slipping into his coat pocket to produce a small tool. A slender pick, not unlike the Roman engraving tool she'd noticed in the alcove. Her lips pursed slightly. A man prepared for locks, she thought, was a man with intent. Before Langston could approach the case, Miss Marple acted. She coughed loudly, a sharp, deliberate sound that echoed in the quiet hall. Langston froze, his hand hovering over the desk, his head snapping towards the tea room. Miss Marple rose, her knitting bag in hand, and shuffled toward the corridor, her expression one of mild confusion. "Oh, Mr. Langston," she said, her voice quavering as if startled. "Is that you? I was just looking for Mr. Winthrop, silly me. I thought I heard someone in his office." Langston's smile was quick, but it lacked its usual polish. "Miss Marple," he said, stepping back from the desk, the pick vanishing into his pocket. "I was just checking on something for the curator. He asked me to look at some papers." His voice was smooth, but Miss Marple caught the slight tremor, the way his eyes darted to the case. "How kind of you," she said, her tone warm but her gaze sharp. "I'm sure Mr. Winthrop will be grateful. I'll let Inspector Harrow know you're here. He's been so keen to follow up on that new lead." She emphasized the last words, watching Langston's reaction. His smile faltered, and his hand brushed his cufflinks, a nervous gesture she'd seen before. At that moment, Inspector Harrow appeared from a side door, his broad frame filling the corridor. "Mr. Langston," he said, his voice gruff, "what brings you to the curator's office at this hour?" His eyes flicked to Miss Marple, a silent acknowledgement of her signal. Langston's composure held, but only just. "Merely assisting Mr. Winthrop," he said, his tone light. "I heard about the new lead and thought I'd offer my expertise." His excuse was plausible, but Miss Marple noted the sweat beading on his brow, the way his fingers twitched toward his pocket. Harrow stepped closer, his gaze narrowing. "Interesting timing," he said. "We've just had word from London about a parcel you sent yesterday. Care to explain?" The question was blunt, and Miss Marple saw Langston's mask slip, his eyes widening for a fraction of a second. "I send many parcels," Langston said, his voice steady but strained. "Business, you know. Nothing to do with the coin." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of innocent concern. "Oh, I'm sure it's all quite proper," she said. "Though I did hear it was a heavy parcel, sent to an antiquities dealer. Such a coincidence, don't you think, Inspector?" Her tone was mild, but her words were a needle, pricking at Langston's composure. Harrow nodded, his hand resting on his notebook. "We'll need to discuss this at the station, Mr. Langston. And that tool in your pocket, let's have a look." His tone left no room for argument, and Langston's shoulders sagged, the fight draining from him. As Harrow led him away, Miss Marple returned to her seat in the tea room, her knitting needles resuming their rhythm. The trap had worked, not because of force, but because of human nature's predictability. Langston's greed, his haste, his need to check the decoy, had betrayed him. She thought of Tommy Pierce, caught red-handed when a trap was set with a fake silver tray. The pattern was clear now, the threads woven tight. As the museum grew quiet once more, Miss Marple smiled faintly, her mind already turning to the final unravelling of the truth. Chapter 10. The Confession, the St. Mary's Mead Police Station, a squat brick building on the edge of the village, was bathed in the pale glow of a single street lamp as night settled over the village. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of ink and old wood. the walls lined with faded notices, and a ticking clock that seemed to mark the slow unravelling of secrets. Miss Jane Marple sat in a corner of the small interrogation room, her knitting bag at her feet, her pale pink shawl draped over her shoulders. She had been invited by Inspector Harrow to observe, a courtesy extended with a mix of respect and bemusement, for he knew her knack for seeing what others missed. Her presence was unobtrusive, her needles clicking softly, a rhythm that blended into the background as Mr. Victor Langston sat across from Harrow at a scarred wooden table, his polished charm now a tattered veneer. Langston's tailored coat was slightly rumpled, his gold cufflinks dull in the dim light, and his face bore the strain of a man caught in a net he could no longer escape. The slender pick, retrieved from his pocket, lay on the table, its bronze gleam a silent accusation. Beside it was the parcel receipt from Mrs. Cobb's ledger. Its details, addressed to Reginald Thorne, antiquities dealer, Mayfair, stark in black ink. Inspector Harrow, his broad frame filling the chair, leaned forward, his moustache bristling with purpose. "Let's have it, Mr. Langston," he said, his voice gruff but steady. "The parcel, the pick, your presence at the curator's office tonight. It's not looking good for you." Miss Marple's needles moved with quiet precision, her eyes fixed on Langston, noting the flicker of his gaze, the way his fingers twitched toward his cufflinks before pulling back. She thought of Tommy Pierce, the saint, Mary's mead rogue, whose bravado had crumbled when faced with evidence. A stolen watch, a witness's testimony. Langston, she sensed, was cut from similar cloth, his charm a shield that could not withstand the weight of proof. Langston leaned back, attempting a smile that faltered at the edges. "Inspector, this is all a misunderstanding," he said, his voice smooth but strained. "I was merely assisting Mr. Winthrop, as I told Miss Marple. The pick is a collector's tool. I use it for examining artifacts. As for the parcel, I send many in my business. Surely you don't think I'd risk my reputation over a single coin?" Harrow tapped the receipt, his eyes narrowing. This parcel, sent to a known antiquities dealer hours before the theft was discovered, was heavy, insured, and express. Mrs. Cobb at the post office remembers you being nervous, glancing out the window. And now we find you in the curator's office with a tool that could open a lock after we announce a lead in the case. Care to explain that coincidence? Langston's smile faded, his hands clenching briefly before he forced them to relax. "I was curious," he said, his tone less assured. "I heard about the lead and thought I might help. I know dealers, you see. Thought I could offer insight." His eyes darted to Miss Marple, as if seeking an ally, but her expression was one of polite interest, her needles never pausing. Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice soft but clear. "It's so interesting, Mr. Langston," she said, as if sharing a village anecdote. "That parcel to Mr. Thorne must have been important, sent so urgently. And your cufflinks, such a lovely Roman design. They remind me of the aureus with its laurel wreath. You must be very fond of such motifs." Her words were gentle, but they carried a weight, a needle pricking at his composure. Langston's jaw tightened, and for a moment silence hung in the room, broken only by the clock's steady tick and the faint click of Miss Marple's needles. She recalled Mr. Carver, the jeweller, whose denials had unravelled when confronted with a receipt and a witness. Human nature, she knew, bent under pressure, and Langston's mask was slipping. Harrow leaned closer, his voice low but firm. "We've wired London," he said. "Thorne's shop is being searched as we speak. If that coin's there, or anything linking it to you, it's over. Save us the trouble, man. Tell us how you did it." Langston's shoulders sagged, his hands falling to the table. The charm that had carried him through the village, through the museum, the cafe, the post office, dissolved like mist in sunlight. "All right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I took it. The aureus. I didn't plan it at first, but the opportunity—" He trailed off, his eyes fixed on the table, as if seeing the coin's golden gleam. Miss Marple's needles paused, her gaze steady. She had expected this, but the confession was a thread pulled tight, revealing the pattern's heart. Harrow nodded, his pencil poised over his notebook. "Go on," he said. "How'd you get it out of the case?" Langston sighed, his fingers brushing his cufflinks one last time, as if clinging to the last shred of his persona. "I visited the museum yesterday," he said. "I'd read about the coin in Dr. Hartley's article, knew its value on the black market. I'm not a thief by trade, Inspector, but I know collectors, men who'd pay a fortune for something like that. I asked questions, got a sense of the museum's routines. Mr. Winthrop was distracted, Doctor. Hartley brusque, and the guard, Reed, seemed slow, with that limp. I noticed the back door was used for deliveries, often left unlocked." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, recalling the scuff mark and rusted hinge she'd seen. Langston continued, his voice steadier now, as if relieved to unburden himself. "During my visit, I lingered in the Roman gallery. The case was old, the lock simple. I've handled artifacts before, know a bit about locks. I used a wax mold, pressed against the keyhole when no one was looking. Later, I made a copy at a shop in the village, a quick job, no questions asked. After closing, I came back, slipped through the back door. It was unlocked, just as I'd hoped. Reed was on his rounds, far enough away. I opened the case, took the coin, and was out in minutes." Harrow's pencil scratched furiously, but Miss Marple's mind was already tracing the pattern. Langston's calculated steps, his use of the museum's weaknesses. She thought of Tommy Pierce, who'd used a copied key to pilfer silver from a neighbour's home, his plan undone by a nosy postman. "And the parcel?" she asked, her voice gentle but probing. "To Mr. Thorne in London." Langston nodded, his face pale. "I wrapped the coin in a book, padded it to avoid suspicion. Sent it express to Thorne. He's a contact, not a friend. He'd arranged a buyer. No names given. I was to meet him in London tomorrow for my cut." His voice cracked, and he looked down, his hands trembling. "I didn't think it had come to this. I thought I'd be gone before anyone noticed." Harrow leaned back, his expression grim but satisfied. "You're in deep, Langston. Theft, conspiracy, black market dealings. We'll need names, Thorne's buyer, anyone else involved." He glanced at Miss Marple, a flicker of gratitude in his eyes, though he said nothing. Miss Marple resumed her knitting, her needles moving with calm precision. Langston's confession confirmed her suspicions. The parcel, the back door, the calculated charm. She thought of Mr. Winthrop's debts, Mr. Reed's argument with a stranger, Dr. Hartley's passion. But none had matched Langston's motive. Greed, cloaked in charisma. The pattern was complete, the threads woven into a clear design. As Harrow called for a constable to escort Langston to a cell, Miss Marple rose, her shawl folded neatly. The confession was the final stitch, but the coin's recovery remained. She trusted Harrow to handle that, her role done for now. As she stepped into the cool night, the village quiet under a starless sky, Miss Marple's mind was at ease. The truth had surfaced, as it always did, in the small details, parcels, tools, glances that betrayed the human heart. She smiled faintly, her steps light despite the late hour, knowing the aureus would soon be back where it belonged. Chapter 11. The Loose Ends. The morning sun broke through the mist over St. Mary's Mead, casting a gentle glow on the village's cobblestone lanes and thatched roofs. Miss Jane Marple sat in the dining room of the Rose and Crown Inn, a steaming pot of tea before her and her knitting bag at her side. Her pale pink shawl was nearly complete, its intricate pattern a mirror of the puzzle she had unravelled. The news of Mr. Victor Langston's confession had spread through the village like wildfire, carried by Mrs. Cobb's eager tongue, and the murmurs of early risers at the post office. Yet Miss Marple, ever cautious, knew that a confession, while tidy, left threads dangling, motives misunderstood, suspicions unresolved, that required careful knotting to prevent future tangles. She sipped her tea, her sharp eyes scanning the room, her mind turning over the loose ends of the case. Inspector Harrow had telephoned earlier, his gruff voice tinged with triumph. The aureus had been recovered from Reginald Thorne's shop in Mayfair, found hidden in a hollowed-out book, just as Langston had described. Thorne, under pressure, had admitted to arranging a buyer, though he claimed ignorance of the coin's theft, a claim Harrow was pursuing with Scotland Yard's help. The coin was on its way back to St. Mary's Museum, and Langston was securely in custody, awaiting charges. Yet Miss Marple, invited to the station for a final discussion, felt the case was not quite closed. The curator's nervousness, the guard's secrecy, the historian's intensity, these were threads that needed weaving into the final tapestry. She arrived at the police station at mid-morning, her steps light despite the weight of her thoughts. The station was quieter now, the frenzy of Langston's arrest subsided, and Harrow greeted her with a nod, his moustache twitching with a rare hint of warmth. "Miss Marple," he said, ushering her into his office. "You've a knack for this, I'll give you that. Langston's confession was solid, and the coin's back. But I reckon you've thoughts on the others. Winthrop, Reed, Dr. Hartley. They've all been cleared, but you're not one to leave stones unturned." Miss Marple settled into a chair, her knitting bag at her feet, her hands folded neatly. "You're very kind, Inspector," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Mr. Langston's guilt is clear, but the museum's little world has its own secrets, doesn't it? I find it helps to understand the whole pattern, even when the thief is caught." She smiled faintly, thinking of her village, where every scandal left ripples that needed smoothing. Harrow leaned back, his notebook open but untouched. "Fair enough," said. "Let's hear it then. What's nagging at you?" Miss Marple tilted her head, her eyes gleaming behind her spectacles. "Mr. Winthrop, for one," she began, his nervous manner, his trembling hands, they spoke of more than shock. Mrs. Cobb mentioned debts, gambling perhaps, confirmed by her cousin at the bank. A man in debt is vulnerable, Inspector, but not always guilty. I believe Mr. Winthrop feared suspicion because of his troubles, not because he took the coin. His devotion to the museum is genuine, like old Mr. Grayson in my village, who nearly bankrupted himself to save the church organ. Guilt over debts, not theft. Harrow nodded, jotting a note. We checked his finances. He's in deep. All right. Loans from 2 banks, payments missed. But no evidence he touched the coin. His keys were accounted for, and he was home by 6, verified by his wife. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a sign of satisfaction. Just so, she said. His agitation was fear of ruin, not a thief's conscience. And Mr. Reed, the guard, his defensiveness troubled me. That argument with the stranger, seen by Mrs. Cobb's nephew, and his insistence on the back door's security, despite the cleaner's talk of deliveries. I wondered if he'd been bribed or distracted, but I think now it was a personal matter, not the theft. Harrow's brow furrowed. We looked into that. The stranger was a debt collector, pressing Reed over an old medical bill from his war injury. He admitted it when we pushed, said he was ashamed, didn't want it known. His rounds were logged, and the door was locked when he checked it, though he didn't mention the delivery. Miss Marple nodded, her mind recalling the scuff mark and rusted hinge. A small oversight, she said, but enough for a clever thief like Langston to exploit. Mr. Reed's pride, like my village's Mr. Jenkins, made him hide his troubles, but he's no criminal. His argument was a distraction, not a plot. She paused, her fingers brushing her knitting bag, as if itching to weave the final threads. And Dr. Hartley, Harrow prompted, leaning forward. She was prickly about the coin, and that row with Winthrop over access made me wonder if she had designs on it. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. Doctor, Hartley's passion is real, Inspector, but it's for knowledge, not possession. Her dispute with Mr. Winthrop was about control, scholarly pride, like Miss Cranston in my village, who hoarded books to protect them. Dr. Hartley's alibi is solid, her work meticulous. She valued the coin's history, not its price. Her intensity was a red herring, I think, though it made her seem suspicious. Harrow grunted, flipping his notebook closed. You're right there. Her office was locked tight, and her notes check out. She was writing till late. No trace of involvement, just a temper when it comes to her research. He paused, a grudging smile tugging at his lips. You've got a way of sorting the wheat from the chaff, Miss Marple. Langston acted alone, then? No accomplices? I believe so, she said, her voice steady. His parcel, his lock-picking tool, his quick departure, they point to a solitary plan driven by greed. He saw the museum's weaknesses, the unlocked back door, the old locks, the distracted staff, and seized his chance. Like young Tommy Pierce in my village, who stole silver because he knew the house was unguarded. Human nature, Inspector, is much the same everywhere. Harrow leaned back, his expression a mix of relief and admiration. The coin's back, Langston's locked up, and Thorne's singing to Scotland Yard. Case closed, thanks to you nudging us along. He hesitated, then added, You ever think of joining the force, Miss Marple? You'd give us a run for our money. She laughed softly, her eyes crinkling. Oh, Inspector, I'm far too old for that. I only notice what's in front of me, like any village spinster. But her smile was sharp, and Harrow chuckled, knowing better. As she left the station, the village was stirring, its daily rhythms restored. The museum would reopen tomorrow, the aureus back in its case, and St. Mary's Mead would return to its sleepy charm. Miss Marple walked toward the inn, her knitting bag swinging lightly, her mind at ease. The loose ends, Winthrop's debts, Reed's shame, Hartley's pride, had been tied off, not with drama, but with understanding. She thought of her own village, where every scandal left lessons in human frailty, and knew that this case, like her shawl, was complete, each stitch in its place. Chapter 12. The Quiet Departure. The platform at St. Mary's Mead Station was bathed in the soft light of a late summer afternoon, the air carrying the faint scent of coal smoke and wildflowers. Miss Jane Marple stood near the ticket office, her small suitcase at her feet, her knitting bag slung over her arm. The pale pink shawl, now complete, was folded neatly in the bag, its intricate pattern a quiet testament to the puzzle she had unravelled. Her holiday in St. Mary's Mead, meant to be a respite from the routines of her own village, had turned into an adventure, but one she met with the same calm precision she brought to her knitting. The train to London, due in 10 minutes, puffed in the distance, its whistle a gentle reminder that her time here was drawing to a close. The village had settled back into its tranquil rhythm, the theft of the aureus, now a tale to be retold over tea and scones. The museum had reopened that morning, the gold coin restored to its velvet cushion, its glass case now fitted with a sturdier lock, a change prompted by Inspector Harrow's insistence. Mr. Victor Langston was in custody, his charm no match for the evidence of his parcel and his lock-picking tool. The London dealer, Reginald Thorne, faced charges of receiving stolen goods, and the black market buyer, traced through Thorne's records, was under investigation. The case, as Harrow had put it, was tidy, but Miss Marple knew that tidiness in human affairs was often an illusion, a surface calm over deeper currents. She adjusted her hat, her sharp eyes scanning the platform. A few villagers milled about, a farmer with a crate of vegetables, a young woman with a letter to post, a boy kicking pebbles along the tracks. Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the museum's players. Mr. Winthrop, whose debts would linger, but whose devotion to his work was unshaken. Mr. Reed, whose pride had hidden a private shame, but not a crime. Dr. Hartley, whose scholarly passion had been mistaken for greed. Each had been touched by the theft, their flaws exposed like threads in a worn fabric, yet none had been the thief. Langston alone had succumbed to the coin's golden allure, his calculated plan undone by a village's watchful eyes, and Miss Marple's quiet persistence. Inspector Harrow appeared at the platform's edge, his broad frame unmistakable, his moustache twitching with a rare smile. "Miss Marple," he called, striding over, "I hope to catch you before you left." "The museum's back to normal, thanks to you. That trick with the decoy coin, sharp as a tack, if I may say." His voice held a grudging admiration, and Miss Marple inclined her head, her smile warm but modest. "You're too kind, Inspector," she said, her voice soft as ever. "I only noticed what was there to see. A parcel sent too quickly, a door left ajar, a man too charming for his own good. You'd have found it all without me, I'm sure." Her eyes twinkled, knowing Harrow's pride needed no bruising, but her words carried the truth she'd learned long ago. Human nature was predictable, its patterns as clear as her knitting once you knew the stitch. Harrow chuckled, shaking his head. "You've a gift, and no mistake. If you're ever back in St. Mary's Mead, the station's doors are open. We could use a mind like yours." He tipped his hat, a gesture of respect, and turned back toward the village, his boots crunching on the gravel. Miss Marple watched him go, her thoughts drifting to her own saint. Mary's Mead, where similar dramas played out in quieter ways. Stolen silver, whispered scandals, secrets uncovered by a chance remark at the post office. The aureus theft was no different, its roots in greed and opportunity, its resolution in the small details. Mrs. Cobb's ledger, a scuff mark on a floor, a glance too nervous to ignore. She thought of Tommy Pierce, Mr. Carver, Miss Cranston, all echoes of the figures here, their flaws and follies as familiar as her village's lanes. The train's whistle grew louder, its steam cloud visible on the horizon. Miss Marple picked up her suitcase, her knitting bag secure, and moved toward the platform's edge. The boy with the pebbles paused to wave, and she returned a gentle nod, her face serene, but her mind alive with reflections. The coin was safe, the museum's honour restored, and St. Mary's Mead would carry on. Its secrets tucked back into its quiet corners. Yet she knew, as she boarded the train and settled into a window seat, that wherever people gathered, temptation followed, and with it, the chance to unravel another puzzle. As the train pulled away, the village receding into a patchwork of green and grey, Miss Marple opened her knitting bag, her fingers brushing the folded shawl. "People are much the same everywhere," she murmured, her voice lost in the train's rumble. Her eyes twinkled, her smile faint but certain. The quiet departure was not an end, but a pause, for the world was full of patterns, and she was always ready to pick up the next thread.